Hi everybody. I'm very thankful to be speaking to you all today. I give special thanks to Edgardo Roman who invited me as a speaker for this Climate for Resistance, Puerto Rico's movement for climate justice event. I hope this presentation is useful and instructive, but most of all, I wish that it gives a reason for Puerto Ricans and other allies to continue to scrutinize these and following administrations and advocate for social and environmental justice in Puerto Rico. My name is Carol Ramos, and I'm currently doing my master's in urban and environmental planning at the Graduate School of Planning in the University of Puerto Rico in Rio Piedras campus. In today's presentation, I will be speaking on Puerto Rico's new zoning changes in whose interest. First, I want to make clear that as a student, I am still learning about planning, zoning laws, and its important tools in the planning discipline. When I became aware of the zoning map and I learned of its implication, I was so mad that I had to do something about it, even though that meant that I would have to start from scratch. I researched, read a lot, spoke with professors and planning practitioners to understand the basic principles behind the map. For me, the public needed to have a basic understanding in order to have an informed opinion and mobilize, and even to scrutinize this subject further on in the future. So I did YouTube videos, participated in radio stations, presented at People's Assembly at the municipality of Orocovis and Ponce. I was also invited to speak at the youth climate strike in front of the capital of Puerto Rico, and I recently wrote 2 articles for the local newspaper. I speak today from this experience to show you a glimpse of how Puerto Ricans have mobilized to stop these new zoning regulations and map. In one sentence, what has happened in Puerto Rico is that the Planning Board of Puerto Rico is doing illegal, tailor-made, and arbitrary changes to the zoning laws that govern all of Puerto Rico without proper participation of the people and viciously denying those changes made. To explain what is the Planning Board of Puerto Rico, it is convenient to highlight that when it was established in 1942, it was located under the office of the governor to provide an integral overview. In other words, that it will consider urban, environmental, economic, and social aspects in its analysis. Even more, Rexford Tocqueville, Puerto Rico's last non-Puerto Rican governor, stated that planning was the fourth power of the government. Nevertheless, in 2018, Ricardo Rosselló's administration passed a bill in compliance with the Fiscal Control Board impositions to put the Planning Board under a recently created office called the Department of Economic Development and Commerce. This means that the Planning Board will now focus only on economic issues and will overlook the environmental and social aspects. This bill was one of many other institutional changes that preluded the zoning change that I will speak on today. This administration first changed the law, then changed the map to make it legal. Ricardo Rosselló's administration started in 2017, and in a few months they passed an amendment to the permit reform which required the Planning Board to decrease the number of zoning districts in Puerto Rico through the consolidation and through establishing special zones when needed. Later, in that same year, they passed Act 38, 2017, which flexibilized the requirement for public hearings and public participation. The 2 red dots that you see on the timeline correspond to the 2 failed attempts of the Planning Board to make public hearing for the joint regulation where they addressed the Act 19, 2017. In the first attempt, they calendarized the public hearing on September 6 of 2017 when Hurricane Irma passed over Puerto Rico. So they postponed for September 20, 2017 when Hurricane Maria landed on Puerto Rico. It was until 2018 when they brought up back these public hearings, but obviously there was lack of participation and interest on the topic because people were still out with a roof, power, or even water in their homes. When this administration put the Planning Board under the Economic Department that I previously talked about on 2018. Not until June 2019, they approved the joint regulation, and within only a few weeks, they made a new zoning map for all of Puerto Rico, with public hearings made in the same week that we were in the streets, claiming for the resignation of Ricardo Rosselló. The most recent event on this timeline is the designation of a committee that our current no-voted for Governor Wanda Vázquez created to instruct herself on this topic. The committee has 90 days to give her a report. I would like to take a moment to highlight that even though we were in the middle of an institutional crisis, the Planning Board did not stop the public hearings. Some people could not participate in the biggest manifestation we did on this avenue because they were defending our land and our right to participate in these public hearings. Thanks to this small group of people, what was first only 10 days of public participation were extended to more than 60 days in total. But what is zoning? In Puerto Rico, it is called calificación or zonificación, but they are the same. Well, zoning is a tool that allows participatory process to create a consensus of multiple and many times incompatible uses and interests on the land use. In a bare hand, some ideas could be to create a luxury condo, parks, a farm, or a conservation area. For others, it's the perfect opportunity for other types of development. This means that zoning is mainly a process of negotiation and participation that should have an integral view of the environmental, urban, social, and economic effects and consequences on the land use, especially considering the long-term consequences. Also, and occasionally, it might be very difficult to combine land uses such as a cemetery and a school. In other words, after this participatory process and decentralized process, there is zoning, or at least that is how it should be in a participatory planning process. Then we can say that zoning basically defines what we can develop or not, how and where, and they can be as specific and as diverse as needed. For example, some zones will only allow small single-family uses. Other zones may allow big factories. And there are different zones for everything in between. The zones can be as specific to define density, construction parameters, and land use. And after zoning is defined, the construction permits will be granted or denied. In the case of Puerto Rico, there are a few differences. First, for me, it's important to make clear that Puerto Rico is a group of islands with diverse ecological landscape that range from tropical to dry forest, and with diverse social and economic landscapes within the 78 municipalities of Puerto Rico. Second, it's important to tell that there are two different scales of zoning in Puerto Rico. There is the zoning defined by the state, which is broad, general, and is basically the Puerto Rico Planning Board saying where you can build and where you can't build. The other is the municipal or local zoning, which is the one that decides use, density, intensity, and parameters of construction. The harmony between the two scales of zoning is key to the implementation of these plans. So to wrap it up, a zoning map is basically this. I think that this is the best representation of a zoning map, and I will explain why. A zoning map will represent all the land uses and that were defined by the participatory process. It should be consistent with state zoning, and it will have different letters and color codes for each plot. In this case, each plot is represented by a key in the keyboard. The zoning map should overlap with each plot, so the color of this keyboard should be exactly over each key. Also, there needs to be a document or guide that provides all the definitions for each color code and letters, and there should be a document that explains why those colors and letters were selected for each plot, therefore for each key. A real zoning map will look like this. They have color codes, a name for each color, a location, and the unit is a plot. This zoning promotes an activity where it is located. But where do we find this description? How do we know that what a green color-coded area called CR for conservation or an orange color-coded area called AP for agriculture area means? These descriptions appears on another regulation or plan document. And something very important that at least in Puerto Rico, if the land use and activity of the zoning area is included in the regulation, then construction permit is given automatically. And I will repeat this. If the land use and activity of the zoning area is included in the regulation, then the construction permit will be given automatically. This is the joint regulation or Reglamento Conjunto in Spanish. This was approved on May 2019, but it is a very deficient document, as many planners have agreed on. In this document, the Planning Board consolidated uses that were previously specifically detailed by each municipality, except for the ones that were still in the planning process. In the municipality of Carolina, for example, they had up to 7 categories for public properties. This allowed Carolina to differentiate cemeteries from schools, parks, and transportation. Nevertheless, in this approved joint permit, Carolina will have all the 7 categories in one zoning district called D. But if you look in the descriptions provided in the joint permit, the zoning district D allows for the development of cemeteries, schools, hotels, restaurants, park lots, pharmacies, museums, parks, housing, all in the same plot. This means that wherever in the map they included zoning D, all of the possible uses will be competing in the same plot, and that all these possible uses will be granted automatically since they are included in this regulation. This is not only problematic, it is illegal. They are not compliant with autonomous municipality law that gives autonomy to each 78 municipalities to define their own municipal or local zoning districts. Worryingly more, they are not providing an equivalent participatory process to all the changes they are proposing. For example, currently we have a process of notification and public hearing for each one of the plots for a zoning change to happen. At the example at the left, you can see that they are doing this public hearing just for this plot change. All the surrounding neighbors also should be at least notified of the zoning changes of the area because it will affect them. But now they are proposing zoning changes for all of Puerto Rico without proper or equivalent participation. We are talking about zoning change for the 1,807,988 plots of Puerto Rico. An equivalent participatory process will mean that for each plot, all the surrounding neighbors should be notified. And they claim they did enough efforts to provide a participatory process when they didn't even try to make public hearings in the majority of the municipalities of Puerto Rico. In the orange dots are the places where they did a public hearing. Another thing, The planning board reduces the amount of municipal zoning categories to 22. This limits the municipality's ability to have a specific, particularly and contextual zoning districts. This is trying to make homogeneous a country that is very diverse, not only naturally, but economically, socially, and historically. For example, El Yunque is very different from other natural conservation areas and should be treated as such. In whose interest could this homogeneity be? Could a person that is interested in making similar developments across the island be benefit from this homogeneity? In whose interest could this supposedly common language be? Will the Planning Board and the new Department of Economic Development be willing to provide permits as quickly as possible at the expense of public participation, environmental degradation, and social inequity? In whose interest? A Puerto Rico for whom? There are a few projects that have been identified by practitioner planners, such as Ponce Paradise and Savannah in Loíza. Meanwhile, when they are reducing the zoning districts, consequently, they reduce the densities. This means that a person with an interest to build a residential R1 housing will have the same amount of permits and authorizations as a person with interest in developing an R3 residential 3 house under these zoning changes. This places poor people in disadvantage. And in case you didn't know, Puerto Rico is the third country with the highest inequality in the world. Again, on the topic of densities. In New York, there are 10 different densities for residential as you see in the image, which should be differentiated not only because of the permit differences, but because each of these buildings will have different consumption needs for potable water, power, parking space, waste management, among others. And the planning board president insists that they are not changing anything. The planner Julio Verdejo, ex-alumni of the Graduate School of Planning, made various analyses as a consultor for the private organization Para la Naturaleza. He evaluated principally the local zoning changes that could have an environmental implication. He noted all the changes that are pictured in this graph. As you might see, many conservation and forest zones are changed to more intense land uses. This is the president of the planning board, Maria Gordillo. She insists that they have not made any changes and that they are only doing what it says on the plan. Not only is she lying, but this planning board did all these changes without an explanatory report where you could see, and forgive the redundancy, the explanation of why they proposed these changes. And an explanatory report is a document that the same planning board has done in the past. This is an example of the explanatory report made for the land use plan approved in the past administration. This report contains a study of demographic changes, land use history, among others, to justify the state's zoning. This means that zoning should never be arbitrary or capricious. Zoning should be justified with as many scientific studies as needed. Also, the president of the planning board insists that they provided enough participation. But, and please bear with me with this slide, let me explain the process that a common person should have gone through to make an informed comment on the online tool that I provided. For this, I will use my friend's name, Edgardo, to give this example. To review the zoning changes, and if Edgardo wanted to see how it could affect his house, he will first need to know how to read, he will need to have power, and he will need to have internet. Then, if Edgardo had all the above, he will have to enter the platform of the planning board, and after about 5 clicks later, he will see the above map to comment. But in this map, Edgardo will only see the proposed changes and not the current zoning districts. If Edgardo knew the previous zoning district by memory, he would still need to have the joint permit to know the description of the new proposed changes, because the map by itself, as I explained before, will not provide this information. If Edgardo, as many others, did not know the current zoning district, he will need to go to the planning office and ask for a municipal plan and its map. I personally did this process just to see how difficult it could be, and I will share that in my municipality they were going to charge me $150 for the printed and digital map. When I told them that I was a college student, they said that I will still have to provide a letter of interest from a professor and pay a smaller amount. So this is not accessible. Also, if Edgardo wanted to make a more informed comment, he will need to see if the local zoning is compatible with the state zoning. For this, Edgardo will need to have a copy of the land use plan. And if Edgardo had all of this in a PDF format, he will have the challenge of seeing the before and after, moving a paper over the other to compare each map over the other and see how they are different or not. But if Edgardo had access to a digital application that could read maps, such as geographical information systems, then he should ask for a shapefile format, which is the best way to make the analysis. He will need the shapefile for the current and local state zoning and the proposed local and state zoning to compare each plot changes, plus other shapefiles like protected area, historical areas, among others. None of this was available for the public to do this accessible for the public to do informed comment. With this barrier of access of information, the private agency called Para Naturaleza made a guide map to gather all these shapefiles and added other maps to try to enable this analysis. But honestly, this was practically impossible. For this reason, and for the first time in many years, people strike against the Planning Board of Puerto Rico, and many times. And a group of planners and planning and architecture students came up with as many creative strategies as possible to motivate the public to comment and get informed. From change.org campaigns to mapathon, callathon, social media hashtags, selfies for Puerto Rico, and even Facebook activism as a platform for education and awareness. With this, more than 20,000 signatures were gathered in about less than 2 months and were sent to the Governor of Puerto Rico, the Fiscal Control Board, and the Planning Board. So what now? Well, the committee that the current non-elected Governor Wanda Vázquez designed will need to give Wanda a report and a specific recommendation. Nevertheless, we need to keep on denouncing that since the joint permit was approved in June 2019, the construction permits are being granted even though the map is not approved. We need to stop this process. People are vigilant and more aware of this subject. Even the Puerto Rican Planner Association has considered the possibility of questioning the planning license of the president of the planning board for her unethical and perverse performance. We need to continue to educate and talk about land use and democratic processes. But this has to be with a decolonial, anti-capitalist, feminist, and climate justice perspective. If not, we are making it worse. Our land is not for sale. Thank you. I hope this presentation was useful. Please feel free to contact me at the following email address.